Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today I'm reviewing the 1.4x teleconverter for the Nikon Z mount series cameras. Now Nikon launched this teleconverter alongside the 70-200 2.8S lens, which is good because it's the only lens that it's currently compatible with. Nikon also launched the 2x variant at the same time. Now, unfortunately, I haven't received my 2x teleconverter just yet. I'm still waiting to even hear of a dispatch time, so I thought it was time to review the 1.4 variant because I've actually been busy taking photos with it for well over a month. In that month, I have learnt something very important. This is not like any of the F-mount teleconverters that I've ever used. Now, I'm not sure whether my opinion is particularly controversial or not, but I didn't like any of the F-mount teleconverters that I've used. I owned various versions, but the most recent ones I had was the Mark II of the TC 2.0 and the Mark III of both the TC 1.4 and TC 1.7. With all of those, I found that you ended up losing quite a lot of definition and sharpness, quite a lot of colour, so you'd lose that beautiful Nikon colour, and it just didn't seem like they were making use of the lenses that I was putting in front of them. And it's not that I was using them with bad lenses. The one that I most frequently attached them to was the 70-200 2.8 VR1 version. But for whatever reason, I just didn't feel like I was getting particularly good quality from them, so I would tend to buy them on eBay and sell them almost as quickly as I got them. This, on the other hand, was something of a frivolous purchase to go alongside the 70-200, partially because I knew I wanted to review it. But this is staying in my camera bag. I had thought about potentially returning it, but I very quickly realised that this is unlike any of the other Nikon teleconverters that I've used. And perhaps so it should be. At £550, it is not cheap, not by any stretch of the imagination. But then again, Nikon has completely reworked this lens, or teleconverter rather. It's now made out of 6 elements rather than 7. They've used an aspherical element, and if I look at the design of it, it actually looks like there's full-size glass elements behind this cutout, which means that from what I can remember, these are much larger than the ones in the TC 1.4 Mark III. Comment below if I'm incorrect and I'm remembering that wrong, but I seem to remember the TC 1.4 Mark III for the F-mount didn't have such a large element on the back, so Nikon's using perhaps bigger glass, which might contribute to the fact that this doesn't seem to affect the sharpness of the 70-200 at all. Now, don't get me wrong, I've only posted my preview of the 70-200 so far. You can find a link to it above. But I'm really impressed with it. I'm working on my full review, but it is astonishingly sharp. And perhaps that's why this teleconverter is so impressive. You just seem to be carrying over that same sharpness that I've been becoming very used to in the 70-200, even when you're attaching it. I like the fact it's fully weather sealed. In the same way that the 70-200 is and the Z6, for instance. I like the fact that Nikon has thought about its design. It's slightly larger than the F-mount counterpart. It weighs 20 or 30 grams more as well. It's 220 grams. So it's hefty, but it's also very small when you add it to the camera. You can see the actual amount you'd add is maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, which I think is, again, an improvement on the other teleconverters I've used. The front element of this teleconverter does protrude very far into the lens, and that's why you can't use it with any of the other lenses that Nikon has released for the Z mounts so far. In fact, the cap for the actual teleconverter has a huge warning on it telling you not to try and mount this teleconverter the wrong way around, because this element protrudes so far that you could end up damaging the sensor by pushing it against it. Nikon is, however, trying to plan for people doing this because there is actually a rubber gasket that goes all the way around the front element, thus protecting it and the sensor if you do accidentally try and mount it the wrong way. Another thing that I've noted is that the autofocus speed doesn't seem to be impacted by whether it is mounted or not. Yes, the Z6 and Z50 that I've both used this with seem to hunt a little bit more in low light situations. However, the actual speed at which it's doing it doesn't seem to be impacted. VR is equally as effective as it is. So both the in-body image stabilization, I don't know why I'm pointing at the Z50 when I'm looking at my Z6 because this doesn't have it, but with the Z6 does work really well in tandem with the VR in the lens with the teleconverter and without it, so there's no impact again. Overall, you basically add 220 grams and a couple of centimeters to the size of the lens, and it is just as easy to use. Another thing I like, and I'm just going to mount it onto my Z50 to demonstrate what I'm talking about, is that Nikon's implemented something that I think is quite neat, which is that when you're looking at the information display with the lens mounted, it will actually change the focal length to take into account the teleconverter that you've mounted. So I can see here that at 200 millimeters, it's actually 280 millimeters with the teleconverter mounted. That's not something that's massively important, and I don't think that a lot of people are going to rely on that information, but it's useful to have it when you're shooting if it is something that you want to make a reference or a note about. So it's quite cool that there's that sort of digital connection that the camera knows not only is the teleconverter mounted, but I need to show different information on the OLED display in addition to that. As you can see, mounted with the Z50 and the 7200, it really doesn't change the look of the lens, and it certainly doesn't change the use of the lens. Yes, the actual zoom ring is at the front of the 7200, something I'm still desperately trying to get used to, having used the VR1 version for so many years that has it mounted in the middle of the lens. But honestly, it's just as comfortable to hold, and it hasn't impacted how I use the lens at all. So overall then, yes, it's expensive at £550. There is no doubt about it. But if you do need extra reach on the 7200 and it is a lens that you're planning to buy or have bought, I do think that this teleconverter is worth buying. I just hope that the 2x teleconverter is as good as this is, because in that case I might have to keep that one as well, which isn't really something I'm planning to do at the moment, but it could be really interesting. And equally, if you look at Nikon's roadmap of lenses that are set to launch, you've got lenses like the 100 to 400 and the 200 to 600, which this is going to be compatible with as well. You might be slightly worried because you might think, well, you know, let's say the 100 to 400 is a 5.6 or 6, well, probably 5.6, I reckon. That's obviously then going to make it an f8 with this lens mounted, I think. And if you have the 200 to 600, that's going to have to be a 6.3. So you're sort of starting to head towards that f11 point. But I think that mirrorless systems have proven that this isn't an issue in the same way it was for the DSLRs that we used to use. The reason I say that is let's look at Canon's RF system. The 800mm f11 that they've launched works perfectly with both the EOS R, the EOS R5, R6. The reviews are showing that the autofocus is still very effective, obviously in fairly well lit situations. So why should this teleconverter and the 2x variant be any worse when we mount those onto maybe the next generation of Z6 and Z7 that Nikon has announced, the Z6 and Z7 II, Mark IIs. So I do think that these are worth investing in. If you already have or are planning to buy the 7200, it gives you that extra reach, perhaps it gives you less reliance on other lenses. Excuse the gong there. But overall, I'm very pleased with it, and I'm a little bit more than very surprised at how good these are. I honestly expected to be returning both this and eventually the 2.0, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, want to know anything else, pop it in the comments. I'm happy to do a follow-up video. Equally, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. As other people say, that other button works too. And equally, please subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.